My name is Jennifer Johnson. I'm 42 years old and I work as a children's book illustrator. This happened just last fall when I decided to take my RV to Ocala National Forest in Florida. I wasn't looking for trouble, only a bit of peace and quiet, a break from the relentless deadlines, and hopefully some inspiration for my next book. I thought the stillness of the forest would calm my racing thoughts. Instead, it left me with nightmares I can't escape. It was early October, and the forest was alive with color. The cypress trees, draped in Spanish moss, towered around me as I navigated my RV down a narrow dirt road. My dog, James, sat in the passenger seat, his ears pricked with curiosity. He was always my loyal shadow, and I was glad for his company. I parked near Juniper Springs, a spot I'd chosen for its seclusion and beauty. The spring shimmered in the afternoon sunlight, crystal clear and eerily still. I set up camp, unpacking my sketch pad and a few supplies. Sheriff Benson, a gruff local I'd met at the trailhead, had warned me to stick to the marked trails and not wander after dark. He mentioned something about the Devil's Lantern, but I waved him off. Every place had its ghost stories. I wasn't here for folklore, I was here to work. The first night was uneventful, though the silence felt heavy. The usual hum of crickets and frogs seemed muted. James growled a few times at nothing in particular, but I figured he was just adjusting to the new surroundings. I spent the next day sketching the landscape, trying to capture the way the sunlight filtered through the trees. James explored the area, occasionally coming back to nudge me for attention. I was starting to feel relaxed, even inspired, until night fell. It started with the light. At first, I thought it was a firefly glowing faintly through the trees, but the glow grew brighter, flickering like a lantern. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the RV. James followed, his hackles raised. The light hovered just beyond the edge of the campsite, swaying slightly as if someone were carrying it. "Hello?" I called out, shining my flashlight toward it. No response. The light retreated, bobbing deeper into the woods. Against my better judgment, I took a few steps closer. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" James barked sharply, snapping me out of my daze. I realized my feet were inches from the trail's edge, and the lantern was much farther away than I'd thought. It wasn't waiting for me. It was leading me. I backed away, pulling James inside the RV and locking the door. The light flickered one last time before vanishing. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or maybe a prank by some local kids, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left behind. I spent the morning sketching, but my hand felt unsteady. I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see the lantern again. When I finally looked down at my sketch pad, I froze. I hadn't been drawing the spring or the trees. I'd been drawing her. A woman, faint and glowing, stood at the edge of my page. Her face was obscured, but her outline was unmistakable. I hadn't drawn her intentionally. My hand had moved on its own. James growled low in his throat, pulling me from my thoughts. He was staring at the door, his ears flattened. "It's okay, boy," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. That night, the whispers started. I woke to the sound of footsteps circling the RV. At first I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the steps were too deliberate, too heavy. James barked and scratched at the door, his teeth bared. Then I heard the laughter. It was faint, like a child giggling, but it sent a chill down my spine. I peered out the window but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped and the laughter faded. I sat in the dark, clutching James until the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees. The next morning, I decided to explore the trails, hoping to clear my head. Sheriff Benson's warning echoed in my mind, but I dismissed it. I couldn't let a few strange noises ruin my trip. I followed the marked trail for about a mile before I saw the carvings, symbols, circles, crosses, and spirals etched into the bark of several trees. They looked old, weathered by time, but they didn't feel random. I sketched them into my notebook, intending to research them later. My name is David Brown, and this happened in November of last year at Lake Diston in Flagler County, Florida. I thought I knew the wilderness. I thought I was prepared for anything nature could throw at me. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. I'd convinced my girlfriend, Linda, 31, and my best friend, William, 30, to join me on this trip. We planned to camp by the lake, explore its hidden beauty, and document everything for my hiking blog, Into the Wild. William would handle the filming with his fancy drone, Linda would bring her sharp wit to our banter, and I'd lead the way. I'd heard whispers about the lake's haunting reputation. Locals claimed it was cursed or haunted, but I shrugged it off. Every place has its ghost stories, right? The first day was uneventful. We set up camp near the shore, close enough to launch our kayaks, but far enough from the waterline to avoid gators. The towering cypress trees, draped in Spanish moss, cast long shadows over the still water, their reflections rippling like an oil painting. The place was eerily quiet. No cars, no planes overhead, just the occasional croak of a bullfrog or the splash of something unseen in the water. My tent had a tear along the seam, and I cursed myself for not checking it before we left. Linda teased me mercilessly while patching it with duct tape. William was already flying his drone, narrating his shots like a nature documentary host. Everything seemed fine until the sun dipped below the horizon. Around midnight, I woke to a sound that set my teeth on edge. It wasn't an animal call, and it wasn't the wind. It was a whisper, faint, just beyond the edge of our camp. It sounded like someone saying my name, David. I sat up, heart pounding, and scanned the darkness. The campfire had died down to embers, and the shadows of the trees stretched unnaturally long, almost reaching the tents. I told myself it was just my imagination and lay back down, but the whisper came again. David. This time it was closer, almost in my ear. I shot up and unzipped my tent, stepping out into the cold night air. Linda stirred and mumbled something, but William snored on, oblivious. I scanned the camp with my flashlight, but saw nothing unusual, just trees and shadows. The whisper didn't come back, but I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I chalked the whisper up to a dream, though Linda noticed the dark circles under my eyes. "Bad night?" she asked, smirking as she sipped her coffee. I shrugged it off. William was buzzing with excitement. "You won't believe what I saw on the drone footage," he said, pulling out his laptop. We gathered around as he played the video. Most of it was scenic shots of the lake and forest, but at one point, the drone had hovered near the waterline and caught something odd. A figure, blurry and humanoid, crouched among the cypress roots. Its proportions were wrong. Its arms seemed too long, its head too small. "Probably a trick of the light," I said, though the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Linda wasn't convinced. "That's not a trick of the light, David. That's a person, or something pretending to be one." The whispers came back that night, but this time, I wasn't the only one who heard them. Linda shook me awake around 2 a.m., her face pale in the dim glow of her flashlight. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, straining to listen. The whispers were faint but unmistakable, circling the camp. They didn't sound like one voice, but several, overlapping and disjointed. William stumbled out of his tent, rubbing his eyes. "What the hell is going on?" he asked groggily. Before I could answer, Linda pointed to the edge of the camp. A raccoon stood there, staring at us. Its eyes glinted in the light, but it didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, unnaturally still. Then it turned and walked away, on 2 legs. By now, we were all on edge. The tension between Linda and me was palpable, and William was growing increasingly jittery. His drone had stopped working entirely, its feed glitching out every time he tried to fly it. "It's like something's jamming the signal," he muttered, fiddling with the controls. We decided to hike deeper into the woods, hoping to clear our heads. As we walked, we found strange markings carved into the trees, symbols I didn't recognize. Linda took pictures with her phone, muttering about sending them to a folklorist friend. The trail led us to a clearing where we spotted something that made my blood run cold. It was the figure from William's drone footage, crouched by the water. Only now it wasn't blurry. It was real. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over sharp bones, its eyes black and soulless. It moved like a puppet on broken strings, jerky and unnatural. When it turned its head to look at us, I felt a wave of nausea so strong I thought I'd be sick. We bolted back to camp. That night, the whispers didn't circle the camp. They came inside it. They called our names, mimicking our voices. Linda's voice called from the woods, though she was right next to me. William's voice laughed from the darkness, though he was cowering in his tent. When I stepped out to confront whatever was out there, I saw it. Standing at the edge of the firelight. The shape. The thing. It wasn't just one figure now. It was two, then three, then more, all shifting and blending together like smoke. They whispered, laughed, and reached for us with two long arms. "Back off!" I shouted, grabbing a burning stick from the fire and swinging it wildly. The figures recoiled but didn't disappear. Instead, they melted back into the shadows, leaving behind an oppressive silence. By dawn, we'd had enough. We packed up in record time and loaded the kayaks. William was pale and silent, clutching his camera like a lifeline. Linda refused to look at me, her face set in grim determination. As we paddled away from the campsite, I felt a strange sense of relief, until I noticed something floating in the water. It was William's drone. "How did that?" William began, but his voice cut off as we turned to look back at the shore. The figures were there, standing in the trees, watching us. One of them raised a hand in a mockery of a wave. We didn't stop paddling until we were miles away. Back home, we reviewed the footage from William's camera. Most of it was shaky and blurry, but one clip stood out. It was taken in camp, though none of us remembered filming it. The camera panned across the tents, then turned to the woods, where the figure stood, its black eyes fixed on the lens. Behind it, more shapes emerged from the trees, each one more twisted and grotesque than the last. The video ended abruptly, and for a long time, none of us spoke. Linda and I broke up a month later. William stopped filming entirely. As for me, I haven't been back to the woods since. I still hear the whispers sometimes, though. Late at night when I'm alone, they call my name, David. My name is Jacob Roberts. I'm 42 years old, and this happened last October in Blackwater River State Forest, Florida. After my wife, Karen, passed away 6 months earlier, I found myself drifting. The house was too quiet, my mind too loud, and I thought maybe some time alone in nature would help me heal, or at least help me breathe again. Karen and I loved camping, especially at Blackwater Creek. It was one of the first places we visited together. So I loaded up my RV, packed my dog Daisy, and headed out, thinking I'd find some solace in the woods. I didn't know I'd be running for my life by the end of the trip. I arrived at the forest mid-afternoon, the October sunlight warm and golden through the pine trees. Blackwater Creek ran dark and slow, its tannin-stained water reflecting the sky like a mirror. The place hadn't changed much since Karen and I were here last, though the silence felt heavier this time. Or maybe that was just me. As I set up camp, Daisy sniffed around, her tail wagging with excitement. She was a sweet Labrador retriever, my constant companion since Karen passed. If it weren't for Daisy, I probably wouldn't have left the house at all. Just as I finished settling in, an older man approached. He looked like he belonged in the woods, with his weathered face, flannel shirt, and a hunter's cap pulled low over his brow. "Name's Henry Watson," he said, extending a hand. "You camping here alone?" "Just me and Daisy," I replied, shaking his hand. "Why?" Henry glanced toward the creek. "This area's got some history. Folks around here call it cursed. Kids used to drown in that creek back in the old days. They say their spirits still wander looking for someone to play with. I chuckled nervously. Ghost stories, huh? He didn't laugh. You hear a child calling out, you leave it alone, you hear me? Don't go looking. Ain't nothing good in these woods after dark. I thanked him for the warning, though I didn't take it seriously. I wasn't here for ghost stories. I was here to clear my head. That first night, the forest was eerily still. I sat by the fire, sipping a beer while Daisy lay at my feet. The sound of the crackling flames was the only thing breaking the silence. Around midnight, I woke to Daisy growling. Her ears were pricked, her body tense as she stared at the RV's door. I listened, my heart pounding. At first I heard nothing, but then came the unmistakable sound of laughter, light and childlike, drifting through the night. I froze. It couldn't be a child, not out here. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by soft footsteps circling the RV. Daisy barked, a deep, guttural sound I'd never heard from her before. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, shining the beam into the darkness. Hello? Is someone out there? Silence. The forest swallowed my words, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement by the creek, a small figure darting behind a tree, but when I blinked, it was gone. I closed the door, locking it this time, and stayed awake until dawn. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease. I told myself the laughter had been the wind, the footsteps an animal. But Daisy wasn't acting like herself. She stayed close to me, growling at nothing and refusing to leave the RV. Determined not to let my nerves ruin the trip, I took a hike along the creek. The trail was muddy from recent rain and the water had risen higher than usual. About a mile in, I noticed something strange. Small handprints pressed into the mud along the bank. They were too small to belong to an adult, and the thought of a child wandering out here alone sent a chill down my spine. Further along, I found an old doll tangled in the roots of a cypress tree. Its dress was torn and its painted face had faded with time, but it was unmistakably a child's toy. I picked it up and an icy shiver ran through me as if the air around me had turned cold. That's when I heard the voice. Help me. It was faint, coming from the woods to my left, a little girl's voice, trembling with fear. My heart raced. I knew what Henry had said, but what if someone really needed help? Hello? Where are you? Help me. The voice was closer now, leading me off the trail. I followed it, calling out, but I found nothing. No child, no footprints, just the whisper of the wind through the trees. I turned back toward the RV, and that's when I saw her. A girl, no older than 7, stood by the creek. She was pale, her dark hair dripping with water, and she wore a tattered white dress. She didn't speak, just stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Are you okay? I asked, stepping closer. She pointed to the creek, her lips trembling. They're in the water. Before I could respond, she vanished, as if she'd never been there. I couldn't stop thinking about the girl. Who was she? Why had she disappeared? The questions gnawed at me as I sat in the RV that night. Daisy pressed against my leg. I considered leaving, but a part of me felt compelled to stay, as though the forest itself wouldn't let me go. The whispers started just after midnight. They were faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but they grew louder, filling the air with childlike giggles and cries for help. Daisy barked and growled, her fur standing on end. Then I saw them, handprints, small and wet, appearing on the RV windows. The whispers turned into a chorus, overlapping voices calling my name. Jacob! Jacob! Come play with us! Terrified, I grabbed a flashlight and flung open the door. The forest was alive with movement, shadows flitting between the trees, glowing eyes peering out from the darkness. And there, by the creek, was the girl again. She smiled this time, her teeth too sharp, her eyes too black. Stay with us, she whispered. I slammed the door shut, barricading it with whatever I could find. Daisy whined, pacing nervously as the RV shook, the voices growing louder. I could feel the weight of their presence pressing in, suffocating me. At dawn, I knew I couldn't stay another night. I packed up as quickly as I could, throwing everything into the RV. Daisy barked furiously as I started the engine, her eyes fixed on the tree line. As I drove away, the whispers followed. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them. Children, dozens of them, standing by the creek. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty, and their mouths stretched into unnatural grins. At the center of them stood the girl, holding the doll I'd found. She waved at me, a mockery of innocence. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away. Back home, I tried to put the experience behind me, but the memories lingered. A week later, I found the doll in the back of the RV. I knew I hadn't brought it with me. I burned it that night, watching the flames consume its tattered dress and faded face. But even as it turned to ash, I could still hear, "Jacob Roberts, come play with us." My name is Liam Harper, and in 2019 I decided to take a solo RV trip to the remote stretches of the Yukon Territory in Canada. I'd always been drawn to the solitude of the wilderness, a chance to escape the constant buzz of city life. This time, I wanted to clear my head after a tough breakup and maybe find some peace in the quiet expanse of nature. The drive up was long but beautiful. The dense forests, towering mountains, and winding rivers were a welcome sight. I set up camp near Kluane National Park, an area known for its glaciers and rugged terrain, but not overcrowded with tourists. The spot was perfect, a clearing surrounded by tall pines with a clear view of the distant snow-capped peaks. After settling in, I decided to explore the nearby trails. The fresh air filled my lungs as I hiked through the forest, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional bird call. I came across a small stream with crystal clear water and stopped to rest. Sitting there, I felt a rare sense of tranquility. On my way back to the RV, I noticed something odd, a rusted hunting trap lying just off the path. It seemed old, but recently disturbed. I didn't think much of it, chalking it up to leftover equipment from hunters or trappers. That evening, I built a campfire and cooked a simple meal. As darkness settled, the forest became eerily quiet. The stars were brilliant overhead, and I found myself lost in their glow, until the crack of a branch snapped me back to reality. Probably just wildlife, I told myself. The next morning, I decided to venture farther out. I packed a day's worth of supplies and headed north. The trail became less defined and the signs of human passage faded. About midday, I stumbled upon an old, black, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, with moss-covered logs and a roof caving in on one side. Curiosity got the better of me and I approached. The door hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, the cabin was sparse, just a broken table and a few scattered tools. Then I saw the walls. They were covered in newspaper clippings and photographs. Stepping closer, I realized the clippings were about missing persons, all from different parts of Canada and Alaska. An uneasy feeling crept over me. The photographs were of people, campers, hikers, even locals, all looking happy and unaware. Some had red X's marked across them. I felt like an intruder in someone else's twisted world. I decided it was time to head back. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a notebook on the floor, partially hidden under debris. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. It was a journal filled with meticulous notes about tracking movements, habits, and patterns of various people. Dates matched the times when some of the individuals had gone missing. A sense of urgency overtook me. I needed to get out of there and inform the authorities. Clutching the notebook, I exited the cabin and started back toward my RV. The forest seemed different now, darker, more confining. Every sound was amplified. I quickened my pace, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then I heard it. A distant whistle, the kind someone would use to signal. I glanced back, but saw nothing. Picking up speed, I moved as quickly as the terrain would allow. Suddenly, a figure stepped onto the path ahead of me. He was tall and rugged, with unkempt hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He wore a tattered coat and carried a hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. "Lost?" he asked in a rough voice. "Just heading back to my camp," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart pounded in my chest. "Not many folks come this way," he said, eyeing me up and down. His gaze settled on the notebook in my hand, and I noticed his eyes narrow. "Found this back there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Figured it might belong to someone." He took a step closer. "That's so? Mind if I take a look?" "Actually, I'm in a bit of a hurry," I said, starting to move past him. He blocked my path. "It's not safe out here alone." "I'll manage," I replied, attempting to sidestep him. Without warning, he grabbed my arm with a grip like a vice. "I insist." Adrenaline surged through me. I wrenched my arm free and broke into a run. Behind me, I heard him curse and give chase. The forest blurred as I dodged trees and jumped over roots. The heavy footsteps behind me were getting closer. A shot rang out, splintering a tree trunk to my right. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself to focus. Up ahead, I spotted a ravine with a fallen log bridging it. I sprinted toward it, hoping to put some distance between us. I scrambled across the log, the drop below steep and unforgiving. Halfway across, another shot echoed, and the log shuddered. I didn't look back. Reaching the other side, I continued running. My lungs burned and every muscle screamed, but I couldn't stop. The forest began to thin, and I recognized a landmark, a peculiar rock formation I'd noted earlier. Relief washed over me. The RV was less than a mile away. Bursting into the clearing, I dashed toward my vehicle, fumbling with the keys. I heard footsteps emerging from the forest edge. I managed to unlock the door and threw myself inside, slamming it shut just as the man reached the clearing. He stood there, a sinister smile creeping across his face. Instead of approaching, he simply watched as I started the engine. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, motionless. I drove straight to the nearest town, several hours away. At the local police station, I handed over the notebook and recounted everything. The officers exchanged glances, and one of them sighed. "You're not the first to report something like this," he said. Over the next few days, an investigation was launched. They found the cabin but reported that it was empty. No clippings, no photographs, nothing. It was as if someone had cleared it out. Frustrated, I insisted on the evidence I'd seen. The notebook was the only tangible proof, and it was filled with disturbing observations. The authorities took it seriously enough to keep the case open. Back home, I couldn't shake what had happened. I started digging into missing persons reports in the Yukon and neighboring regions. Patterns began to emerge, disappearances that happened annually, always around the same area. I learned that the man I encountered was likely Victor Klein, a former wilderness guide who went off the grid years ago after being suspected in several vanishings. He was never charged due to lack of evidence. It became clear that Victor was hunting people, using the vast wilderness as his cover. His motivation seemed rooted in a twisted desire for dominance and control, viewing the wilderness as his domain to enforce as he saw fit. I shared my findings with the authorities, but without concrete evidence of his current activities, their hands were tied. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Months later, news broke of a hiker who had gone missing in the same area. A search party found remains and signs of foul play. This time, with increased pressure, the authorities conducted a more thorough search and eventually apprehended Victor in a remote part of the forest. In the end, Victor Klein was charged with multiple counts related to kidnapping and murder. The notebook I had found played a crucial role in linking him to the crimes. As for me, I haven't returned to the wilderness since. The open skies and towering pines no longer hold the same allure. After the trial, it was revealed that Victor believed he was the rightful protector of the land, removing those he deemed unworthy of experiencing its beauty. His delusions drove him to commit unspeakable acts against unsuspecting travelers. I suppose if there's any dark humor to be found, it's that my quest for solitude led me straight into the path of a madman who despised intruders. Talk about getting away from it all. My name is Liam Carter. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last 10 years chasing stories about nature and folklore, the kind of stories that make people look at their world differently. Most of the time, the mysteries I dig into have rational explanations, a trick of the wind, a misremembered tale. But what happened to me at Devil's Millhopper Geological State Park was different. It wasn't rational. This happened in October 2021. I had driven to Gainesville, Florida to explore the park and camp overnight in my RV. Devil's Millhopper had been on my list for a while, thanks to the local legends swirling around its sinkhole. Whispers of cursed settlers, strange disappearances, and echoes that didn't belong. It sounded like the perfect mix of history and mystery for my blog. I arrived late in the afternoon. The park was quiet. The off-season meant fewer tourists, which was fine by me. The air was humid, the kind that clings to your skin and makes everything feel a little heavier. I parked the RV in the lot closest to the sinkhole trail and set out to explore. The sinkhole itself was breathtaking, a massive crater carved into the earth and overgrown with lush greenery. Trails snaked down its sides, with wooden steps descending into the shadows. From the edge, I could hear water trickling far below, and every sound, birds, leaves rustling, even my own breathing, seemed amplified by the acoustics of the crater. I started down the steps, my camera in hand, pausing to take pictures of the layered limestone walls and hanging vines. The farther I went, the cooler the air became and the light grew dimmer. About halfway down I stopped. I heard something, a voice. Ella. It was faint, almost like the whisper of a breeze, but it was clear enough to make me freeze. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing strangely. No response. Just the sound of water below and the occasional rustle of leaves. I shook it off. Acoustics, I told myself. Sound bounces in weird ways here. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that crept over me. Back at the RV, I started to notice small, annoying problems. The lights flickered when I turned them on, my GPS cut out briefly, and my phone couldn't seem to hold a charge. It wasn't anything I couldn't manage, but combined with the odd vibe of the park, it put me on edge. I made dinner, sat down to write some notes, and tried to distract myself. But as the sun dipped below the trees and the shadows deepened, that feeling of being watched settled over me. Around 9 p.m., I heard the first knock, 3 sharp raps on the side of the RV. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Hello? I called out, sliding the curtain back to peer outside. Nothing. The empty parking lot stretched out under the pale glow of a nearby street lamp. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time, the knocks were softer, almost tentative, as if someone or something was testing me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth, and the night was unnervingly silent. I circled the RV, shining the beam of light into every corner, but there was no one there. As I climbed back inside, I noticed something on the window, a small handprint smeared in the condensation. A child's handprint. The knocks didn't return, but the night was restless. I dreamed of water, of being pulled under by something I couldn't see. When I woke, the handprint was gone, though I hadn't touched it. Determined to shake off the fear, I headed back to the sinkhole. The morning light made it feel less oppressive, and I reminded myself why I was here, to find a story, not scare myself out of one. I started down the steps again, but this time I wasn't alone. A figure stood near the bottom, staring into the water below. "Good morning," I called out, my voice echoing. The figure turned, revealing a man in his 50s or 60s. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, his hat tilted low over his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice gravelly. I frowned. It's a public park, I'm just exploring. He didn't respond, just turned back toward the water. Why shouldn't I be here? I pressed. The echoes don't lie, he said. Then he walked away, disappearing into the woods at the base of the sinkhole. I spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of his words. Who was he? A park ranger? A local? His warning gnawed at me, especially when the whispers started again. This time they were louder, more insistent. Ella, they called. Come closer. I stood at the edge of the water, staring at my reflection. For a moment it looked wrong, distorted, like a face staring back at me from under the surface. I stumbled back, shaking my head. That evening, I went into town to gather more information. The locals were friendly enough, but when I mentioned the sinkhole, they grew quiet. One woman, Martha, leaned in close. You're not the first to hear things down there, she whispered. Back in the 1800s, settlers disturbed something they shouldn't have. A burial site, they say. The spirits never left. Do people still go missing? I asked. Not anymore, she said. People learned to stay away. I didn't. That night the knocks returned, louder and more insistent. This time they were accompanied by faint crying, a child's voice pleading for help. Help me, it whimpered. Please. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. Who's there? The crying stopped. Then, from the direction of the sinkhole, I heard it again. Ella. I couldn't ignore it. Something compelled me to follow, to find out what was calling me. I grabbed my jacket and headed down the trail, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air grew colder as I descended, and the whispers grew louder. They weren't just calling my name anymore. They were accusing. You let him die. I froze. You didn't save him. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. My brother Sam drowning in the river while I stood frozen on the bank, too afraid to jump in after him. I'd been 15. That guilt had followed me ever since. But how could they know? At the bottom of the sinkhole, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing in on all sides. I shone my flashlight around, searching for something. Then I saw it. A figure stood across the water, cloaked in shadow. Its shape shifted as I watched, flickering between forms. A man, a child, something inhuman. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its voice was a distorted echo of my own. You came, it said, its voice like nails scraping on glass. What do you want? I asked, my voice trembling. It stepped closer, and I realized its feet weren't touching the ground. You, it said simply. I ran. The trail twisted before me, the trees closing in like grasping hands. The whispers followed, growing louder and more chaotic, overlapping into an unbearable cacophony. When I finally burst into the parking lot, the RV was dark. The engine sputtered as I tried to start it, but the headlights flickered and died. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw the handprint. It wasn't alone this time. Dozens of handprints covered the windows, smeared as if clawing to get inside. I don't know how I made it through the night. I don't know how I managed to drive away when the RV finally started. What I do know is this. Something lives in that sinkhole. I don't write about Devil's Millhopper anymore. Some stories are better left untold. But every now and then, when I'm alone, I hear it again. The echoes. My name's Noah Bennett, and this all went down in 2009 near the Rockies in Wyoming. I was there for what I thought would be an easygoing few days of camping with the RV, away from the noise of the city. I'd driven down from Missoula, Montana, where I worked construction, sometimes logging. After 3 years working with loud saws and hefting heavier beer bellies than my own, I figured some quiet nights and a view were just what I needed. I parked my RV off a dirt path in Bridger-Teton National Forest. The air was sharp but fresh, the kind that clears your head in a way you only appreciate when you're surrounded by concrete 5 days a week. My setup was simple, parked near a small creek for water, camp chairs, and a fire pit set up a stone's throw from the RV. After 2 nights of nothing but the sound of the stream and some elk clomping around in the woods, I'd started to think I'd lucked out. But then things took a turn. It was late, and I was sitting around the fire finishing up some chili when I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine in the distance. At first, I thought maybe it was a forest ranger or another camper lost on the winding trails, but this engine sounded ragged, like it was on its last leg, whining and sputtering as it got closer. A beat-up truck, rusted and dented, crept up along the path. I could see the outline of the driver in the dim light, a guy with a long, scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low. He stopped his truck a good 50 yards from my RV, then just sat there, the engine idling. I waved, as you do, just to acknowledge his presence and make it clear I wasn't a threat. He didn't wave back, didn't turn off his headlights, just sat there like a statue. After a while, I called out to him, asking if he was lost or needed help. He didn't respond. Now, I'm not one to spook easily, but there's something about being watched in the middle of nowhere that'll make anyone feel off. I kept an eye on him for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 15 minutes. Finally, the truck's engine died, but the guy didn't step out. He just stayed in his seat, staring forward. I got up, half expecting him to come over, maybe ask for directions or a drink, but he didn't budge. I went back into the RV, locked the door, and watched him from the small window. I thought he'd leave, or maybe pass out in his truck, but around midnight he stepped out, slamming the door so hard it echoed. He was big, barrel-chested with hands like slabs of meat, wearing some kind of old leather jacket that looked stiff as a board. He took a few steps toward my RV, then stopped. He didn't say anything, didn't try to introduce himself, just stood there in the dark. I stayed in the RV, hoping he'd get the hint and leave. Instead, he turned, walked back to his truck and disappeared into the trees, leaving his truck abandoned on the path. The fire outside had burned down to embers, so I was alone with the silence, the RV dark save for the faint glow of a battery-operated lamp. Every sound felt amplified, the creak, the occasional crack of a branch. I told myself he was probably just a local drunk and weird. I tried to shake off the unease, reminding myself I was in Wyoming, where everyone's a little more rugged than you'd expect. But I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I heard shuffling around the RV. I held my breath, hoping it was just a deer, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Peering through the window, I saw him again, closer this time. He'd ditched his jacket, his shirt covered in grime, his chest heaving as he looked around the campsite. I thought of calling out, but something in his stance, leaning forward, his face half lit by the moon, made me think twice. Instead, I stayed silent, gripping a small hunting knife I kept in the RV for emergencies. He started rummaging around my campsite, tossing my folding chair and stomping on the fire pit stones, scattering ashes everywhere. He was talking to himself, mumbling words lost to the sound of the creek and rustling leaves. Then he circled the RV, his fingers tracing along the side, tapping at the windows like he was trying to gauge if anyone was inside. I could hear him muttering under his breath, but nothing made sense. He seemed angry, frustrated, like he was looking for something, or someone. At one point, he banged on the RV door hard enough that the entire vehicle shook. I sat still, barely breathing, knife in hand, praying he'd get bored and leave. Instead, he pulled a crowbar from his belt and started prying at the door. That was it for me. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it right at him through the window. For a moment, he froze, staring at me with something between surprise and amusement. He tilted his head, gave me a half smile that was anything but friendly, and then stepped back. My heart was hammering. The guy was built like a freight train, and I wasn't exactly armed for a showdown. He took another step back, his eyes flicking between me and the door, probably sizing up how much trouble I'd be. Then he laughed, a cold, hollow sound, and turned, vanishing into the tree line. I stayed up the rest of the night, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, listening for any sound that might mean he was coming back. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As the first light hit, I packed up what I could, tossed everything in the RV, and was ready to hightail it out of there. But before I could start the engine, I saw something in the dirt by my fire pit. A piece of cloth, an old shirt, torn and stained, lay half buried in the dirt along with a rusty pocket knife and some cigarette butts. I grabbed the cloth and tossed it in the trash bag I kept for the trip, then looked around, trying to figure out where he'd gone. My eyes landed on a small trail leading away from my sight. I wasn't about to follow it, but something caught my eye, a pair of women's shoes, small, dainty, and covered in mud, abandoned near the base of a tree. I didn't want to think about what those shoes meant, but something about that trail felt wrong. I should have left right then, but curiosity got the best of me. I took a few cautious steps down the path, scanning the area, half expecting the guy to jump out from behind a tree. The trail wound down toward a ravine, where I spotted a few more discarded items. A torn purse, a broken phone, and something that made my stomach drop. A leather-bound notebook. The notebook was smeared with dirt and barely legible, but the pages that were readable were like something out of a horror novel. Notes about collecting, scribbled reminders about staying quiet and hunting times. There were names listed, dates, even some crude maps marking locations across the forest. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there, but I couldn't help but flip through more pages. Each name had a date and a description. The brunette by the lake, hiker with the red jacket, and then chillingly, guy in the RV. That was when I dropped the notebook, every nerve in my body on fire. I sprinted back to the RV, jumped in, and cranked the engine. As I looked back toward the trail, I saw him again, watching from the trees, a twisted smile on his face. He knew I'd found his little journal, and he didn't seem to care. If anything, he seemed pleased, like he'd been hoping I would. As I pulled out of the campsite, he stepped out of the trees, standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I floored it, not caring if I wrecked the suspension on the rocky trail. All I wanted was to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. It wasn't until I hit the main road that I finally let myself breathe, hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I thought about calling the Rangers, but something told me this guy knew the area too well, that he'd be long gone by the time anyone showed up. Instead, I kept driving, leaving Wyoming in the rear view. Days later, curiosity got the best of me, and I started digging around online. I found reports of missing hikers in the area, people who'd vanished without a trace. Every now and then, there'd be a mention of someone matching the description of the man I'd encountered, a drifter, a supposed survivalist who'd been spotted along trails camping in the wild. I couldn't shake the last line I'd read in that notebook, the only one scrawled with an eerie precision. Bane last one. Time to move. My name is Marcus Reed, and I'm 39 years old. For the past 2 years, I've been living out of my RV, roaming from one campsite to another. It started as a way to escape the suffocating routines of my old life. My job as a firefighter, the divorce that followed, and the guilt after a child died in a fire I couldn't save. I told myself the open road would give me freedom. What I didn't know was how easily freedom can turn into isolation. This happened in November 2022. I had heard about Tate's Hell State Forest on an RV forum. The name caught my attention immediately, and the photos of its dense, hauntingly beautiful landscape sealed the deal. A slice of heaven, one user wrote. If you don't mind the legends, another added. That should have been my first red flag, but I shrugged it off. They were just stories, right? I arrived late in the afternoon. The forest was sprawling and eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you second-guess your every move. A ranger station sat near the entrance, but it was empty. A handwritten sign on the door reading, "Closed for the season." Perfect, I thought. No tourists, just me and nature. I found a clearing about half a mile in and parked my RV. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the fading sunlight cast long twisting shadows across the trees. I set up a small fire pit and unrolled my camping chair, ready to enjoy the solitude. Before I could sit, an old man emerged from the trees. His grey beard was scraggly, his clothes worn and patched. He carried a fishing rod and a bucket of bait, though I hadn't seen any rivers or ponds nearby. "Evening," he said, his voice raspy but friendly enough. "Didn't expect company this deep in." I smiled. "Just passing through, needed some quiet." The old man chuckled. "Quiet, huh? You picked the right place. Quiet as the grave." He let the words hang in the air, his smile fading. "Just don't wander too far, son. These woods, they don't always let folks find their way back." "Superstition?" I asked. "Something like that," he said, adjusting his bucket. "They say this place got cursed a long time ago. A witch burned alive by settlers and she cursed the forest with her last breath. Now it's hers. People hear whispers, see things, and if she don't like you..." He trailed off, letting the silence speak for itself. I thanked him for the warning, though I didn't believe a word of it. He tipped his hat and disappeared into the trees, his footsteps fading with the day's light. That night, my RV lost power. I was in the middle of cooking dinner when the lights flickered and died, leaving me in darkness except for the glow of my lantern. My phone, fully charged just an hour ago, was suddenly at 5%. A coincidence, I told myself. Old wiring and a cheap charger, nothing supernatural. I stepped outside to check the generator and was met with the kind of silence that felt alive. No insects chirping, no wind rustling the branches, just a dense, oppressive stillness. The air was colder than it should have been for November, biting at my skin. As I fiddled with the generator, I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a figure, pale and fleeting, at the edge of the clearing. My heart skipped. I spun, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. The next day, I decided to explore the trails. The morning sun burned off the eerie chill, and the forest seemed more inviting. I followed a narrow path that twisted through thick pines and cypress trees, their roots gnarled like ancient fingers clawing at the earth. I wasn't far in when I noticed symbols carved into the trees. Crudely drawn but deliberate, circles, triangles, and shapes I couldn't recognize. They repeated every few feet as if marking a path. I took pictures thinking they might make a good addition to the blog post I was planning. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. Landmarks I swore I'd passed once before seemed to appear again, as though the forest was shifting. At one point I found myself walking in circles, the same carved tree greeting me no matter which direction I chose. Then I saw her. A woman stood ahead on the trail, barefoot and dressed in a tattered white gown that looked centuries out of place. Her hair was long and matted, her face pale and drawn. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me with eyes that seemed too large for her face. "Hello," I called, keeping my voice steady. She raised a hand, pointing back the way I'd come. "Don't go further," she said. Her voice was soft but carried a weight that made my chest tighten. "Are you lost?" I asked, stepping closer. She shook her head. "Go back. Now." Before I could respond, she turned and vanished into the trees, leaving no trace of her presence. By the time I made it back to the RV, the sun was setting. The carvings on the trees had spread closer to my campsite, as though something had been working while I was gone. I tried to rationalize it. Vandals, locals playing tricks. But my nerves were fraying. That night, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely audible over the crackle of the campfire. But as the hours passed, they grew louder, more distinct. My name, over and over, carried on the wind. Marcus. I bolted inside the RV, locking the door and closing every curtain. The whispers didn't stop. They pressed against the walls, seeping through the cracks, surrounding me. And then the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. I grabbed a flashlight and threw the door open, half expecting to see the old man or the pale woman. But there was no one there. Only a fresh carving on the door frame, a triangle etched deep into the wood. By the 3rd day, I was unraveling. Sleep had been impossible, and my supplies were running low. The forest seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour, the trees pressing closer to the RV like an encroaching tide. That evening she came again. The woman in white stood just outside the firelight, her face obscured by shadows. "You stayed," she said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "I don't want trouble," I said, clutching the hatchet I'd kept by my side. "You've brought it," she replied. "What do you want from me?" She stepped closer, the firelight revealing her face, or what was left of it. Her skin was cracked and blistered as if burned, and her eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural light. "This forest is mine," she said, her voice a guttural growl that barely resembled the soft tones from before. "You trespass, you defy, and now you pay." The forest erupted around me. Shadows sprang to life, twisting into monstrous forms with gnarled limbs and hollow eyes. They circled the RV, their whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. I stumbled back, clutching the hatchet, and kicked over the firewood. Flames leapt higher, casting frantic light on the clearing. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, slashing wildly at the shadows. The woman in white stood at the edge of the firelight, watching with an expression I couldn't read, mocking, pitying. In desperation, I grabbed one of the carved symbols I'd taken from the forest, a small piece of wood etched with a triangle, and hurled it into the fire. The effect was immediate. The shadows recoiled, their forms dissolving into smoke. The woman in white let out an ear-piercing shriek before fading into the night. By dawn, the forest was still again. The carvings were gone, the RV's power restored, as though none of it had ever happened. But as I drove away, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. A single carved triangle on the last tree before the road turned. A warning or a reminder, I don't know. What I do know is this. Tate's Hell isn't just a name. It's a promise.
My name is Ethan Hayes, and I'm 38 years old. What I'm about to tell you isn't some tall tale for clicks or likes. It's the truth, even if I can't prove it. This happened in the summer of last year, deep in the heart of Hockomock Swamp, Massachusetts, a place some people call the heart of the Bridgewater Triangle. I went in as a skeptic, thinking I'd spend a week documenting my survivalist skills for my blog. I came out broken, both physically and mentally, and I'm still not sure if I escaped at all. It started with an idea I'd had for months: test my skills by surviving 7 days alone in one of the most notoriously haunted places in the country. I didn't believe in ghosts or monsters. I thought the stories were just folklore blown out of proportion. So I packed my gear, tent, GPS, water purifier, knives, and my GoPro, and drove to the edge of the swamp. The first thing you notice in Hockomock Swamp is the silence. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just the occasional drip of water and the squelch of mud underfoot. It was oppressive, but I chalked it up to the swamp's natural atmosphere. By late afternoon, I found a clearing to set up camp. As I hammered into the soggy ground, I felt it, the sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder several times, but there was nothing but dense trees and mist. "Get a grip?" I muttered, shaking off the unease. That night, I built a small fire and recorded my first blog entry. I talked about the swamp's history, how the Wampanoag people believed it was a place of great spiritual power, and how locals whispered about strange lights and creatures. As I spoke, the words felt heavier than I expected, like they carried a weight I didn't understand. I fell asleep to the crackling of the fire. When I woke up, the fire was out, and something felt off. As I stepped outside the tent, I froze. Bare footprints surrounded my campsite. They were human-like, but too large, with long, claw-like toes. Maybe a prank, I whispered, though the words felt hollow. Who would trek this far into the swamp just to mess with me? And why wouldn't I have heard them? I brushed it off, deciding to explore further into the swamp. My GPS flickered in and out, forcing me to rely on a map. Around midday, I stumbled upon something bizarre, a crude shrine made of animal bones and sticks, perched on a stone slab. The air around it was colder, almost suffocating. I took a few photos and moved on quickly, feeling an inexplicable dread. That night, as I edited footage by the fire, I noticed my knife was missing. I searched the tent, my backpack, nothing. Finally, I found it stuck in a nearby tree, blade first, as though it had been thrown with precision. My stomach churned. I didn't sleep well. On the third day, my water purifier broke. I cursed under my breath, knowing I'd have to boil water from now on, which would cost me precious time and energy. The swamp seemed to mock me, its stillness amplified by my rising frustration. That night, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I lay in my tent, the sounds became distinct. My name, spoken softly over and over. Ethan, Ethan, help me. It sounded like my ex-girlfriend's voice, fragile and pleading. My rational mind told me it was a trick of isolation, a manifestation of guilt. But when I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the whispers moved, retreating into the darkness. I didn't follow. On the fourth day, I stumbled upon the shrine again, or at least I thought it was the same one. This time, the bones were arranged differently and symbols were carved into the trees around it. "What the hell?" I muttered, taking a step back. That's when I saw it, a figure in the distance, crouched low to the ground. It was humanoid but distorted, its limbs too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. It didn't move, just watched me. I don't remember running back to camp, but I must have. By the fifth day, I was a mess. My gear felt like a hindrance more than a help, and I was down to my last energy bar. The whispers had grown louder at night, and my maps didn't seem to align with the terrain anymore. I was lost. That evening, as I boiled water over a dwindling fire, I heard a branch snap. I turned and saw it, the figure from before, now closer. Its face, it was my face, but wrong, stretched and twisted. "Leave me alone," I shouted, throwing a rock at it. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it mimicked my voice. "Leave me alone." I backed into the tent, clutching my knife like a lifeline. Desperation clawed at me. On the sixth day, I tried to retrace my steps to the edge of the swamp, but every path seemed to loop back to the shrine. I felt trapped, like the swamp itself was conspiring against me. That night, the entity grew bolder. It slashed at my tent, tearing through the fabric like paper. I scrambled out, swinging my knife wildly, but the creature danced just out of reach. It was toying with me. On the final day, I decided I had nothing to lose. I gathered dry branches and doused the shrine in lighter fluid. As the flames roared to life, the swamp seemed to shudder. The entity appeared again, screaming. Not a human scream, but a guttural, animalistic roar. It charged at me, its claws slicing across my arm as I stumbled backward. I swung my knife blindly, connecting with something solid. The creature shrieked and disappeared into the shadows. I ran. When I finally emerged from the swamp, I collapsed into the arms of a search and rescue team. I'd missed my check-in by 3 days, and they'd been combing the area. They didn't believe me about the creature, my footage was corrupted, and the photos I'd taken of the shrine were blurred beyond recognition. But sometimes late at night, I hear it, the whisper, my name. The swamp didn't let me go. It just gave me a head start. My name is Sebastian Harris Hunter. I'm 45 years old, a retired high school teacher, and a widower. What I'm about to tell you happened just last month during a solo camping trip off Old King Road in Flagler County, Florida. I thought I was looking for peace and quiet, maybe even a little closure. Instead, I found something I still can't explain, something that might still be out there waiting. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. The drive down Old King Road was scenic but desolate, with tall oaks draped in Spanish moss and palmettos crowding the edges of the narrow dirt road. My RV, a beaten-up 1994 Winnebago, rattled over every bump, but I was used to it. This wasn't my first trip, but something about the stillness unsettled me. I stopped at a convenience store a few miles before the campsite to grab some firewood and snacks. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, looked up from her magazine as I approached. "Camping out on King Road?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Yeah," I said. "I heard it's quiet out there. Good stargazing." She hesitated. "It's quiet, all right. Just don't wander too far from your RV, and if you hear anything strange, don't go looking for it." I laughed it off, but her words stayed with me as I drove the final stretch to the campsite. The sun was low, and I parked near a pond. The water was dark and still, the air smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. I liked the solitude. At least, that's what I told myself. The first sign that something wasn't right came that night. I had a small fire going, and the RV's generator was humming softly. I was sitting by the fire, nursing a cup of instant coffee when the generator sputtered and died. The sudden silence was jarring. "Damn thing," I muttered, grabbing a flashlight to check it out. Everything looked fine. No loose wires, no obvious problems. When I flipped the switch, it roared back to life as if nothing had happened. I returned to my chair, but the unease lingered. The forest around me felt too quiet, like the wildlife had been holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Probably a raccoon, I thought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I decided to explore the area. The pond looked serene in the daylight, its surface reflecting the gray sky. As I circled it, I noticed something strange. Footprints in the mud. They were large, clawed, and definitely not human. A chill ran down my spine. That's when I saw him, a teenage boy, maybe 15 or 16, standing at the edge of the trees. He was thin, with dirty clothes and wild, unkempt hair. His eyes darted nervously as if he didn't want to be seen. "Hey there," I called out. Are you lost?" The boy flinched, but he didn't run. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping closer. "Do you live out here?" He shook his head. "It's watching you. It watches everyone. You have to leave before it gets dark." Before I could ask more, he turned and bolted into the woods. I considered going after him, but something in his voice, pure, raw fear, stopped me. I returned to the RV, uneasy. That evening, I found a mutilated deer near the edge of the pond. Its body was torn apart, the flesh twisted and shredded as if by massive claws. I've seen animal attacks before, but this was different. It looked deliberate. I decided to stay inside the RV that night. The generator kept cutting out, leaving me in darkness for minutes at a time. Each time the lights flickered back on, I thought I saw movement outside the windows, shadows darting just out of sight. Around midnight, I heard a sound that froze me in place. My late wife's voice. "Gabe," Emily whispered, "come outside." I knew it wasn't real. I'd been dreaming of Emily ever since she passed, but this was different. Her voice was so clear, so close. When it called again, I almost opened the door before catching myself. "No," I whispered, backing away. "You're not real." The whispers stopped, but the RV shuddered violently, as if something heavy had slammed into it. I grabbed a kitchen knife and held it tight, my heart racing. The shuddering stopped, leaving me in silence. The next morning, I found deep scratches on the RV's door, like claw marks. The boy, Ethan, appeared again, standing at a distance. His eyes were wide, his face pale. "It's hungry," he said. "It doesn't stop." "What is it?" I demanded, approaching him. "What's out there?" He hesitated, then muttered, "It's old. It was here before us. It feeds on fear, on grief. If you don't leave, it'll take you." I tried to get him to explain, but he ran off again. This time I followed him. He led me deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser and the air colder. Finally, we reached a clearing with strange symbols carved into the trunks. Ethan pointed at them. "This keeps it out," he said. "Stay here if you want to live." Before I could ask more, he vanished into the trees. I looked around, my pulse hammering. The forest felt alive, the air thick with an oppressive energy. The whispers started again, louder this time, coming from all directions. I returned to the RV, but the hunger followed. That night, it showed itself. I was sitting by the fire when the forest went silent. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure at the edge of the trees. It was humanoid, but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its eyes glowed yellow, fixed on me. "Emily," it said, its voice distorted and hollow. "Come to me." I stood frozen as it stepped closer. The firelight flickered, and I saw its face, or what was left of it. The flesh was stretched and rotting, its mouth too wide, filled with jagged teeth. I grabbed a can of lighter fluid and dashed it onto the fire pit, igniting a massive flame. The creature recoiled, letting out an unearthly shriek. I ran toward the symbols Ethan had shown me, the hunger chasing me through the trees. The moment I crossed the boundary of the symbols, the hunger stopped. It paced back and forth, hissing and snarling, but unable to cross. I stayed there until dawn, clutching the knife and listening to its guttural growls. When the sun rose, the hunger vanished. I returned to the RV, packed up, and drove away without looking back. I stopped at Maggie's store on the way out. She took one look at me and nodded. "You saw it, didn't you?" I nodded, too shaken to speak. "You're lucky," she said. "Most people don't make it out." Later, I tried to find information about Ethan, but no one had seen a boy matching his description in years. Some said he was a ghost, a victim of the hunger long ago. Others claimed he was something else entirely, a guardian of sorts, protecting the living from the forest's darkness. Whatever the truth, I know one thing for certain. The hunger is real, and it's still out there, waiting. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 45 years old, and this happened a few months ago when I decided to take a break from the life I'd been barely holding together. My wife, Clara, passed away last year, and the silence of my empty home had become unbearable. I'd always loved music. It's what I taught for years. But after she died, I couldn't bring myself to pick up a guitar. So I bought an RV and decided to travel, hoping to find something, anything like that would help me feel alive again. That's how I ended up at Big Shoals State Park in Florida. I'd read about the park's rapids, the largest in the state, and thought their roaring, chaotic beauty might inspire me to compose again. What I didn't know was that the silence I'd been running from would find me there, in the voices of the dead. I pulled into the park just before dusk. The forest was dense and quiet, save for the distant roar of the rapids. The ranger station was empty, but I found a map pinned to the bulletin board outside. It marked a few trails and campsites, one of which was near the riverbank. That's where I decided to stay. As I set up my RV, a ranger approached, a woman in her 40s wearing the usual khaki uniform and a wide-brimmed hat. Her name tag read, Maggie. "Camping alone?" she asked, her tone polite but laced with concern. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just needed some peace and quiet." Maggie nodded but hesitated. "The rapids can be unpredictable. Be careful if you hike near the water." She paused, glancing toward the tree line. "Some people say you can hear voices out there at night. Probably just the water playing tricks, but it can be unsettling if you're not used to it." I smiled, more amused than unnerved. "Thanks for the warning." Maggie didn't return the smile. "Just don't wander too far." With that, she left, her words hanging in the cool evening air. After dinner, I sat outside the RV with my guitar, strumming idly as the last light faded from the sky. The sound of the rapids was louder now, a constant rush that drowned out the usual nighttime symphony of crickets and frogs. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of inspiration. Maybe this trip wasn't such a bad idea. Then I heard it, a faint giggle like a child's carried on the wind. I froze, my fingers stilling on the strings. It was faint, almost drowned out by the river, but unmistakable. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing there. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. No answer. Just the river and the faint rustle of leaves. I told myself it was nothing, just an echo or my imagination playing tricks, and went inside to sleep. That night I dreamed of Clara. She was standing by the river, her back to me, humming the lullaby she used to sing when we were younger. I tried to call out to her, but no sound came from my lips. When I woke, my cheeks were wet with tears. The next morning, I decided to hike one of the trails that wound along the river. The air was crisp and the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden streaks, but the unease from the night before lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About halfway down the trail, I noticed something odd. Small footprints in the mud, too small to belong to an adult. They ran alongside my own for a few steps before veering off toward the river. There were no other campers around, and the sight sent a chill down my spine. As I followed the trail, the roar of the rapids grew louder, almost deafening. Then I heard it again. A child's laughter, clear and sharp, cutting through the noise. I stopped in my tracks, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called. Again, no answer. Shaking my head, I pressed on, determined to reach the riverbank. When I got there, I found something even stranger. A small, moss-covered doll lying on the rocks. Its face was faded and weathered, but its eyes seemed to glint in the sunlight, almost as if they were watching me. I picked it up, examining it closely. As I turned it over, a faint melody began to play, a music box tune, soft and haunting. My breath caught in my throat. The tune was the same lullaby Clara used to hum. That evening, I couldn't shake the melody from my head. It felt like the forest was closing in, the shadows growing longer, the air heavier. As I sat in the RV, the music box tune began to play again, faint at first, then louder. I searched the RV, convinced I'd accidentally brought the doll inside, but it wasn't there. The tune stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft knock at the door. I froze. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle and yanked the door open. No one was there, just the empty forest bathed in moonlight. Then I saw them, shadows flitting between the trees. They were small, childlike, moving too quickly to be human. My stomach churned as I realized they were circling the RV. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The RV began to shake as if something, or many somethings, were pounding on the sides. I shouted for them to stop, but the noise only grew louder, the whispers and laughter blending into a chaotic cacophony. Finally, I grabbed my guitar and strummed the first chords that came to mind, playing louder and louder until the shaking stopped. The laughter faded, leaving only the sound of my music and the distant roar of the rapids. The next morning, I knew I had to leave, but something drew me back to the river. I followed the trail again, clutching the doll I'd found. The voices were louder now, calling my name, singing the lullaby in eerie, childlike tones. When I reached the riverbank, the air grew icy, and the shadows beneath the trees seemed to ripple like water. "I know you're here," I said, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The voices grew louder, and the shadows took shape. 3 children, their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark voids. They stared at me, their expressions a mix of sadness and anger. "Help us," they whispered, their voices overlapping in a haunting harmony. "What do you need?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. They pointed to the doll, and in that moment I understood. They were tied to it, bound to the river by whatever tragedy had claimed them. I placed the doll on the ground and stepped back, watching as the children reached for it. But as their hands touched it, their forms began to twist and contort, their whispers turning to wails. The river surged, the rapids crashing violently, and the shadows rushed toward me. I stumbled backward, tripping over the rocks, and ran as fast as I could, the screams echoing in my ears. I left Big Shoals that day, vowing never to return. The doll stayed by the river, but the memory of those voices has haunted me ever since. I tried to write about it, to turn it into a piece of music, but every time I play, I hear their whispers in the background. A week after I got home, I found the doll on my porch. Its music box was broken, but sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear it playing.